Clapper board, you're about to hear an original HFY sci-fi tale titled Alien Nurse Shocked by an Unexpected Inflammation Between Her Human Patient's Legs. Find a quiet spot, put on your headphones, and let the stars fall silent. If you enjoy cinematic sci-fi narrations, consider subscribing for more. Now we begin. They pulled him from the wreck in a rain of white sparks, a silent snowfall of burning insulation fluttering through vacuum. The hospital bay of the Medusan cruiser swallowed the debris and the angles of the war, replacing shrapnel and screaming alarms with antiseptic light, soft air, and the quiet tapping of instruments that measured lives in heartbeats per second. The cruiser's hull thrummed from distant impacts. Far beyond the bulkheads, somewhere in the reachless dark, fleets maneuvered like schools of steel fish, their wakes lines of radiation and intent. On a bed shaped like a cradle for giants lay a human, scorched uniform, skin mottled with bruises that bloomed like purple galaxies, eyes flickering beneath lids that hadn't learned to stay closed. He breathed in, he breathed out, and each cycle sounded like a choice. The nurse assigned to him had sea-glass eyes and ears that tapered like the wings of a swift. She was Eralyn of the Medusan Accord. Her name was Lyrix, and she had learned human physiology from a library of holograms and a 10-minute seminar given by a harried liaison with a cracked voice. The seminar mentioned that humans bled red, grew hair, and refused to die when polite biology said, "Here is the door. Use it." Lyrix stood over the human and cataloged the damage. Fractured ulna, contusions along the rib cage, a momentary arrhythmia that corrected itself as if embarrassed to have been noticed. She murmured the same word in her own language and in his steady, soothing syllables that were more breath than sound. The light above his bed painted a soft halo at the edge of his profile, and the halo trembled with the distant thunder of war. The room around them was a curve of white and a whisper of yellow. A med-scanner ring, dormant, waited like a watchful moon. Atmospheric monitors drizzled data across a transparent screen. Beyond the glass, the rest of the triage ward rippled with motion. Stretcher drones moving like patient insects. A surgeon with 6 hands leaning into a field of scarlet, his eyes reflecting 1,000 years of practiced calm. A child of another species whimpering, soot like ash freckles across her face as another nurse tucked a silver blanket around her. The human's identification chip pinged obediently when Lyrix waved her wrist over his shoulder. His name scrolled across the air in a human alphabet that looked to Lyrix like a row of soldiers standing at attention. Jace Corbin, Sergeant, age 32 standard, home, Earth. Lyrix said it softly, tasting the consonants. Jace, his heart noticed. It skipped, then found rhythm again as if reluctant to appear rude. Lyrix adjusted the bed to take pressure off his spine and inserted an auto-suture cartridge into the dermal applicator. The device hummed honey-warm, knitting torn edges into clean lines. The ship shook. Somewhere, someone shouted. The speaker system bled a warning tone that curdled into a command, all non-essential personnel to shelter. Lyrix ignored it. Trauma didn't wait politely for orders to resolve, and this human had met trauma like a dance partner on a burning floor. She began a full-body scan, sliding the med-scanner's moon ring over him. Numbers ghosted across her retina display. Healthy bone density, overactive adrenal response. Severely dehydrated. Lyrix prepared a hydration drip and iliac infusions that would deliver electrolytes without pressuring the heart. And then she saw it. At first, it registered as a swelling on the scan, localized vascular engorgement in the groin region. In Medusan physiology, such rapid swelling could mean hemorrhage or a parasitic calcifier. Lyrix's hand froze midair. The human's vitals climbed another degree in cadence as the ship bucked under them. She had a decision to make. The manual had not briefed her on this particular presentation, Or if it had, she had missed it while the liaison coughed and the alarms sang their different notes. Lyrix moved with clinical care, lifted the edge of the sheet and looked. What she saw, what any clinician would interpret as an alarming inflammation, was, to her, not immediately linked with reproduction. Medusans reproduced through a seasonal exchange of luminescent proteins, seen only as delicate moss-green veining at the wrists. Human anatomy, by comparison, was frank and sculptural. Her mind evened out under training. She catalogued again: significant swelling, heat differential, no immediate discoloration. Not a hematoma, not an infection, not an arterial rupture. The human's heart rate ticked faster, as if embarrassed for both of them. Lyrix let the sheet fall in place and spoke to the air, intending her voice to be caught by the ward recorder. Patient presence with acute vascular response in external reproductive tissue, likely a neuroendocrine reaction to stress stimuli rather than pathological inflammation. Monitor only. Do not intervene. She flushed a color only another Aerolin would notice and focused on his face. He was asleep or close enough to it, features slackening, courage resting. She pressed a cool cloth to his forehead and adjusted the ambient temperature down a half degree. Minor environmental changes often calmed human physiology. She had learned that in the field, watching a pair of miners from Mars fall asleep against each other in a tent that hummed like a heart. When Jace opened his eyes, war was a muffled rumor, and the glow of the light above him offered the uncomplicated mercy of morning. Lyrix stood to his left with a posture like a held cord. The ring of the scanner loomed behind her like a halo around a god he'd never met. He spoke first, voice cracked, humor fumbling for daylight. "You an angel." Lyrix didn't know the word. "I am Lyrix, I'm your nurse." He blinked toward the ceiling as if those were words whose weight needed to be learned anew. "Nurse, okay, where's?" He didn't finish the sentence, he didn't need to. The last thing he remembered was a blast like a summer thunderhead detonating inside his skull, then the gentle push of nothingness that came with a spin into space. He had not expected to wake. Lyrix lifted a bulb of water, its surface tension holding it like a suspended planet. "Sip," she said, guiding it to his mouth. He drank and tasted clean metal and borrowed time. The bed whispered adjustments beneath him as if trained to sense embarrassment and flee from it. "The others?" he asked. Lyrix's sea glass eyes shifted and Jace wondered what sea had ever been that color. "Some. We are still receiving pods." He exhaled carefully. Somewhere inside that breath lived the names of a crew, an inventory of jokes, a nearly empty bottle of scotch, a letter half-written to nobody. A tremor shook the ward. Instruments rattled lightly, then settled with murmurous beeps. A child in a neighboring alcove began crying, quiet at first, then a thin knife drawn over soft skin. Lyrix took 2 steps, smoothed a blanket with one hand, sang a note from her spine. The child's cry dwindled, caught and cradled by the sound. Jace watched her. "You sing to us." "Music changes the chemistry of grief," Lyrix said simply. "And your species is a chorus in its bones." Jace smiled, pain and wonder sharing space at the corners of his mouth. He liked that idea that he was bones and chorus both. The war came back to him not as map or orders, but as a pattern of losses. The Ovinex scavenger kings of a dozen dead planets had found Earth's orbital mining arrays ripe with edible metals. They came like locusts that had learned calculus, and they sent human crews drifting while they chewed. Jace had been on the Charon's reach, escorting civilian ore ships burning slow and careful by the moon. The Ovinex cut them off, dragged them into a lattice of gravity dips like a fisherman's net. Someone screamed, the reach rolled, and a beam sliced the ship open like a fruit. Jace remembered grabbing the nearest body, shoving him toward an escape cocoon, feeling the pressure of vacuum pry at his skin, then nothing. But he was here. He had a nurse whose voice stitched the edges of the world together, and he owed somebody the rest of his life. Lyrix adjusted his drip and studied the map of bruises on him as a cartographer might examine a coastline. "You were surprised," she said quietly, "by the strike." "We were outmaneuvered," Jace said. "Won't happen twice." Lyrix accepted the human vow without comment. She had lived long enough to know that vows were the architecture of survival, even when physics refused to sign the permits. She made a note to increase his electrolyte infusion. His cheeks were losing their paper white for a more reliable color. His heartbeat found the middle path. Then the ship screamed, an alert in a frequency designed to catch a mind regardless of language. The overhead screens flickered. Bold symbols, boarding risk. Hull breach, Sector 7. Lyrix and Jace turned toward the sound as if they could see it. The med ward doors glissated closed and reinforced themselves with a soft sigh. The surgeon with 6 hands lifted 2 of them in a gesture that meant, "Continue, we do not own the road beyond the threshold." Jace pushed on his elbows. Pain wrote a letter to his nerves, and every letter arrived overnight. He lay back down, teeth clenched. The ceiling light stuttered. "Stay," Lyrix said, sharper than she intended. "You might need fighters," Jace said. "We need you alive. We have fighters." She glanced at the ward's security screen. Drones along the corridor unfolded components like beetles extending wings. The Medusan Marines were a story of black armor and green runes that glimmered faint between plates. The Ovinex, if it was them, would find their boarding more expensive than planned. The intercom crackled. A voice, calm, clipped, announced pressure equalization in the outer corridor. 9 hostiles. The Marines engaged. The surgical ward paused its breath like a curtain between scenes, then located the next heartbeat to save. Lyrix looked at Jace again, and in the gaze he saw what the war wanted, a quiet place where you could not be hit. The war always tried to take places like that first. He nodded. He would stay for now. He drifted. He dreamed. He saw Earth, blue and brown and green like an old atlas, come alive. He saw his childhood kitchen, his mother's back, his father's laugh. He saw a dog that had learned the secret language of footsteps and waited at the right door whenever he came home. He saw a girl on a bridge, hair blown by a wind that smelled like rain, eyes daring him to jump into the river of a life that would always be more water than map. When he woke, the ward was intact and almost ordinary. An orderly scraped up blood like it was spilled wine and made the floor new again. The child had stopped crying and now slept with her thumb in her mouth, alien and familiar at once. The surgeon stretched his 6 hands and left a chart on the foot of a bed. Lyrix sat by Jace's bed with a posture that suggested vigilance worn into comfort. A cup of something fragrant steamed near her elbow. She saw his eyes open and smiled, and Jace felt a slice of warmth across a morning that didn't deserve as much light as it gave. "I owe you," he said. "You owe the living," she corrected gently. "You owe yourself." "Fine," he said. "I'll pay in installment plans." A beep from the panel chirped like a small bird. Lyrix leaned to verify dosage. Her movements were unhurried, practiced. But when she returned the panel to passive display, Jace saw her hands. They trembled slightly. "They boarded?" he asked. "Yes," she said, "and we repelled them." She looked toward the doorway as if remembering a scene still playing behind her eyes. Marines from the Cultural Liaison Unit. One of them was human. He shouted something. He had a rifle that squealed like a rainstorm. When it was over, he laughed. "Sounds like one of ours," Jace said, and meant, "It feels like home to survive together." Lyrix tilted her head. "Is it true what they say about humans? They say lots of things. That you turn terror into jokes. That your bodies sing louder when they are hurt. That you make a flag out of rags and then it becomes silk because you carry it into every storm and refuse to let go." Jace considered the ceiling. "We don't try to be like that. We just are when the day asks for it." Lyrix stored the answer away in the same place she kept lullabies and dosage protocols. She watched his pulse for another minute before switching off the drip and allowing him to drink more. He did greedily, as if water had just been invented. The day's quiet dissolved later, not with alarms but with a slow creep of dread that entered like cold through an unsealed window. Medusan ships could sing to each other through vacuum, a soundless chorus in the electromagnetic spectrum threaded with data, humor, and warnings. Lyrix felt the shift not in sound but in the tiny muscles at the back of her neck, messages turning from routine to urgent. The ward screens flickered again. A symbol bloomed, a geometry of lines that looked almost organic. Not Ovinex, worse in a different way. The vast were coming. Jace had heard rumors just enough to lace through nightmares as a taste of iron and ice. The vast had no planets. They were a fleet, a nation made of hunger and math. They harvested stars when the markets dipped. They calculated returns on genocide with the kind of attention usually given to art. They were not evil. They were a spreadsheet that had learned to grow teeth. Lyrix felt the ship lean its attention toward threat. The captain's voice threaded softly through the ward, so calm it steadied the hands of every nurse and surgeon in the room. We have unexpected company. We will perform the dance we have practiced. Protect your patients. We will protect you. Jace sat up. The bed adjusted itself like a friend trying to anticipate every shift. He swung his legs over the side and met pain again halfway and bowed to it without kneeling. I need clothes, he said. Lyrix eyed him. You need rest. I need both, he said. Compromise, you give me clothes and I will rest in motion. It's a busy ward, she replied, deadpan. He grinned, the corner of his mouth a tiny rebellion. I'll carry bedpans if you hand me a sidearm. I do not hand out sidearms. She touched his shoulder, and the touch was a flame you could hold. But perhaps you can carry something else. Lyrix led him, steadying his gait until his legs remembered work. Past a partition, behind a panel that pretended to be a wall, was a bay stacked with case after case of medical supplies. Some were cozily familiar, bandages, syringes. Others bristled with instrument heads like a bouquet of silver flowers. Lyrix retrieved a case the size of a lunchbox and pressed it to Jace's hands. This is a portable field seal. It can weld atmosphere into an injured hull, hold back vacuum for a few minutes. It's not a weapon, but it's the shape of an answer to certain questions. Jace hefted it. How the hell do I use it? You point at the place where space is trying to become your inside, Lyrix said. You press this. That I can do. They left the ward with the surgeon's raised eyebrow giving Jace the blessing of someone resigned to the invincible stubbornness of patient species. The corridor was a ribcage of light bordered by darker veins. Drones scurried like curated anxiety. 2 Marines ran past, armor glittering in the ward light like oil on water. When they reached a junction, the ship shuddered. Lyrix flinched. Jace tightened his hold on the case and looked around for a window that didn't exist. Where? Spine corridor. She pointed left. Near the auxiliary reactor. If the vast blind our engines, they will try to bite. Then we're going to the spine, Jace said, and thought of the dog that always knew which door held him, and he walked toward the place where the ship might have needed him most. On the way, Lyrix spoke into the air, her voice crisp. Lyrix of Triage Ward 3 moving to Spine Corridor with 1 human volunteer, and a voice answered. Acknowledged. Be swift. They were swift. Adrenaline cheated pain and steady breathing cheated panic. When they turned the corner into the Spine Corridor, it felt like stepping onto the back of a giant living thing. The walls thrummed with power. An alarm light spun like a slow lighthouse, painting shadows in revolving slices. The floor was wet where a cooling line had ruptured. 2 Marines crouched behind an equipment rack, communicating through hand signs that looked like a language learned before speech. 10 meters away, a piston shutter had half closed, and beyond it, a purple-black fog, not gas, not smoke, but a swarm of microflesh that wanted to be everything. The vast like to send their tendrils first, little machines that digested whatever they touched and reported home on the flavor. If allowed, they grew opinionated, and then they grew teeth. Lyrix pulled Jace behind the rack as a drone swerved, its sensor eye blinking a tired apology before it crashed into the wall and died with delicate sparks. The Marine spared the newcomers a glance. One of them, human, grinned. He said something that might have been a joke or a prayer. Jace looked to Lyrix. She looked to him. Without ceremony, they were a team. A seam along the ceiling hissed, a whisper of air leaving a body that had already bled enough. The field seal in Jace's hands gave a soft purr like a cat calibrating. He breathed in. He breathed out. He leaned out from cover as if the world could only be saved by a man who would risk the part of him that was still afraid. The fog coalesced, sensing movement, and surged forward like a thought that had found its word. A Marine fired a scatter pulse that cut a trench through it. The wound healed in a shiver. The shutter creaked lower, speed limited by safety protocols now useless. Jace slid on one knee across the wet floor, the move a memory from a game he had played as a child. He slammed the field seal against the seam and pressed the device's heart. It woke, an unfurling of lattices that danced out from the device like spiderweb frozen into crystal. The lattice anchored itself across the seam, the endothermic reaction sucking heat from the air, frosting the edges of the metal. The hiss stopped. The fog hesitated, tasted the barrier, and flowed sideways. It reached the equipment rack and began digesting it with delicate patience. Not hungry for humans right now. The human Marine muttered, "I'll try not to take that personally." Jace backed up, legs shaking, and met Lyrix's hand. She pulled him upright with a strength that looked gentle until you leaned on it. He raised the field seal again, found the next seam, stuck another frost lattice into place. The fog probed, learned, reconsidered. A tide of small shapes came skittering down the corridor, ship repair units fitted with emergency UV emitters. Someone had thought of everything and then added one more idea for luck. The units brightened. The fog recoiled visibly, molecules reconsidering their life choices. A Marine rolled to his stomach, trained a rifle that wasn't a rifle but a microgravity manipulator that condensed sections of fog into dense beads and then dusted them with UV. The fog flailed, suddenly less confident, the way a rumor falters when facts walk into the room. Lyrix felt more than saw the shift. This was winnable. Not the war, this moment, that was enough. They sealed 3 more seams. The fog broke, split apart into a smear of failing ideas, and slithered back through the half-closed shutter like an embarrassed animal retreating to its den. The shutters shut. The corridor breathed. Jace fell to one knee and let the floor hold up his plans. Lyrix knelt beside him, her hand on the back of his neck, the gesture so automatic and tender it made him want to sleep for a week. He didn't sleep. He stood. He looked around at the faces, Marines, a pair of engineers who had come to watch but stayed to work, Lyrix with her steady eyes, and felt the hot iron of shared relief poured into the mold of camaraderie. Men and women and beings without either gave each other the brief luxury of a grin. The human Marine clapped Jace's shoulder. "Nice save, Sarge." "I was just the guy with the glue," Jace said. "Glue wins wars," the Marine said. "People do," Lyrix corrected softly. "They return to the ward because wards multiply needs by the minute, and because victory in corridors doesn't excuse you from the very old game of keeping a body alive 1 second at a time." Jace let the bed remember his shape. Lyrix checked his lines and frowned at a swelling in his ankle that hadn't been there before. She iced it with a gel that smelled like mint and singing metal. He hissed, then laughed, then hissed again because even laughter had edges today. Time became a patient that needed gentle handling. The ship lived and fought. News slipped through channels like fish through reeds. The Ovinex coalition had been pushed back from the outer moon line, but held a cluster of mining stations like stolen teeth in their pocket. The vast hung at the edge of engagement, as if calculating the dividends of horror. Earth was far away the way a childhood room is far away. You could reach it with a thought, but your hands would always touch the memory first. Jace found himself drawn to the child in the adjacent alcove. Her hair was a shade of ink that made him think of starfields. Her skin was a quiet violet. She woke at one point and watched him with the open curiosity of the very young and the very old. He lifted one hand. She lifted one hand. In the space between their hands existed every language they didn't share. He remembered Lyrix's word about music and he hummed. The note was rough, clumsy, human as a scraped knee. The girl's eyes softened. Lyrix, behind him, smiled into a chart. Later, after Jace slept and woke and slept again, Lyrix told him the girl's story. Her name was Eerie. She'd lost both parents in the Ovinex assault but clung to a cousin's belt until a rescue drone found them. The cousin did not survive the trip through vacuum. Eerie did, small body curled around a sliver of warmth like a seed. Jace stared at the ceiling and saw a river. He saw a bridge. He saw names. He didn't cry now. He had promised himself he would cry later when it could be a full ritual and not a leak. Lyrix saw his restraint and respected it with the decency of silence. She adjusted a new set of monitors around his bed, sleek and almost invisible, calibrating them to the way human bodies lied about pain. She had learned to listen to the lies and the truth both. When the next rupture came, it wasn't a hull seam but a broadcast. The vast had learned to speak. Across every channel the same voice, genderless, accentless, a bomb and a blade. "We are the market," it said. "We propose terms." Lyrix's spine straightened. Jace sat up despite the protests of muscles that had signed no contract for this shift. Terms were always a trick, but sometimes tricks bought a day. The Medusan captain accepted a conference, one ship to one fleet, one voice against a chorus. You could see the captain's face on the ward screen. She had the look of someone who had loaned her courage out so often that some of it never returned, and she didn't resent the debt. "We are a hospital ship," the captain said calmly, the translator giving each word the details of breath and doubt and resolve. "You do not besiege a shelter. That is in every culture's book of prohibitions. You carry assets," the market replied, gently contemptuous. "Assets with future value. Our terms account for mercy at 0.2% above sector average. We will compensate you for loss of morale." Jace made a sound that wasn't a laugh, wasn't a word, something between a cough and the first pop of a match. Lyrix watched the captain's eyes, saw something there that she had only glimpsed once before, in an old elder of her village when a flood came. It was the expression of a person measuring a wall against a river and deciding they could do nothing but stand on the wall and become part of it. "No," the captain said. The market paused, the delay a bad attempt at mimicking anger or surprise. "Our terms were favorable to you," it observed. "Your math is wrong," the captain replied. "It doesn't know what it means to stay." The market withdrew its voice, perhaps to calculate the cost of taking what was denied. The ships moved. Space foamed in the subtle way it always did when intention bent physics. The Medusan cruiser dove like a whale finding the deep, putting herself between teeth and her calves. Jace rose. Lyrix rose with him as if neither could imagine the other sitting while the world tilted. "What can we do?" Jace asked. "Life support is stable, we are mobile, we may need." Lyrix stopped talking because she was listening to music only she could hear, a thread of data song winding through her bone. "We may need an impossible thing," she finished. "Those are my favorite," Jace said and meant it, because impossible things were the only ones that once done made the universe blush. "There's an emergency drive," Lyrix explained, walking fast now, Jace moving beside her, the ward a receding home. "It's old, dangerous. It was designed for catastrophes we hoped never to see. It requires calibration from the inside." Jace blinked. Inside the drive, inside the Esper coil, she corrected. It harmonizes with neural patterns to thread a narrow path between probabilities. It was prototyped with Erelin minds in mind. But the math suggests human neural noise might punch a hole wide enough to leap the fleet. Neural noise, Jay said, chewing the words. That's what you call our stubbornness. It is one of your beautiful names, Lyrix said, and in any other moment he would have made a joke about beautiful and noise. They reached the coil room. It looked like an altar and an engine had decided to be one thing. Looming arcs of metal curved toward a hollow sphere that hummed with a note just below hearing. Technicians stood pale and sturdy around it, their hands full of tools that could be used to repair failed dreams. One technician was a human woman with hair cut close to her skull and eyes the color of steel that had seen fires. "We'll burn the coil," she warned. "And maybe the volunteer." "Maybe?" Jace asked. "We don't have charts for your mind," she replied. "We have legends." Jace considered the empty inside of the coil, the curve of its cradle, the hum that felt like standing on a cliff with the wind insisting you were born to fly. He considered the ward, the child eerie sleeping because someone had dared to sing. He considered Lyrix, the nurse who had taken his pulse with her hands and told the recorder to let biology be embarrassed in peace. He considered the captain, a wall on a river. "Legends will do," he said and stepped forward. Lyrix moved to stop him. Her hand was half an inch from his chest when she pulled it back, not out of agreement, but because stopping someone like him now would be like holding back a tide with a net. "You risk death," she said. "Again. We all do, every day." He let the humor leak through because it was the only currency he was truly rich in. "Besides, I've had worse first dates than a drive coil." Lyrix blinked, puzzled, then understood it was a joke. The shape of her smile was a private sunrise. The technicians fitted a crown of sensors around Jace's temples, along his spine, at his wrists and ankles. The human woman handed him a mouthpiece. "Bite this if you decide you want your tongue later. And when the coil tries to show you everything, pick one thing, hold it, don't let go." "What thing?" She looked toward the ward as if she could see through steel. "A face. A laugh. Anything with weight." Lyrix stepped close as Jace lay back in the hollow. The coil curved above him like a rib cage. She touched his forehead. The gesture said everything. She translated it anyway, soft and fierce, as if the act of speaking forged a spell. "Stay," he nodded. "Come find me if I don't." "I will," she said, and it wasn't bravado, it was logistics. They activated the coil, it sang. Sound is the wrong word. Jace felt the note in his teeth and the roots of his hair and in the memory of his fingernails. The humming room elongated and became a corridor and then a river. He was an object thrown into the river with intent, and he was also the river, churning toward a mouth he couldn't see. The technicians watched gauges that spun slowly like planets. Lyrix watched Jace's face. At first his expression held the determined calm of someone who had walked into a storm because the children were behind him, and the door needed closing. Then the calm cracked, and he saw everything. Everything. He saw not the past or the future, but the anxious lattice of probability that had wrapped itself around this moment. He saw the Medusan cruiser as an equation and a prayer. He saw the vast like a spider at the center of a web made of profit and hunger and doubt. He saw Earth as a bead of blue hammered into a necklace of warships and hunger pangs and holiday lights. He saw Lyrix's hand hovering half an inch above his chest forever, a compulsion to protect etched into the universe like a law. Then he remembered the advice and found a thing. He found a bridge and rain. He found a girl daring him to jump. It had been a day at 19. They had jumped. The river had been cold and shocking, and he had come up gasping and laughing, and certain that if you didn't take unreasonable leaps, you didn't deserve to tell people stories. He held that day like a handle. The coil shuddered. The technicians murmured in 2 languages. "His noise is too beautiful," one said in awe, which was both bad and good. The human woman adjusted a dial with the casual bravery of someone who understood exactly how much she was risking. "Lean into it," she told the coil. The ship groaned, a whale deciding whether to dive. The corridor outside lurched as the physics around the cruiser softened its edges. The Vast noticed. The Ovinex noticed. Everything noticed and reached for the ship as if reaching for a stray coin rolling toward a gutter. Lyrix leaned toward Jace, put her mouth near his ear. "Hold," she said, not a command, an invitation that sounded like forgiveness. Jace held. He did not hold the war or the ship or the fear. He held the laugh on the bridge, the rain like drills on his skin, the feeling of his heart deciding again to be a heart. The coil drank that memory and spun it into the pattern it needed. The ship Dove. For an instant longer than it had any right to be called an instant with rooms in it, with history and dinner tables and lullabies. Jace and the cruiser threaded a needle of probability so thin it might as well not have existed except that he believed it did. Space bent, complained, relented. They emerged behind a different moon, 3 light towers away and a world to the right of a fate that would have devoured them. The ward flickered back into quiet. The corridor found its floor. The captain's voice arrived without its earlier tightness. "We have jumped. All hands assessment. Triage report." Lyrix exhaled a breath she had not admitted she was holding. She turned to Jace, ready to smile, ready to joke, ready to scold him for having nearly killed himself. Then she saw his face. He wasn't dead, he was drowning. The coil had let go, but the river hadn't. His eyes looked into a distance that wasn't behind his head. His pulse fluttered like a moth trapped behind glass. Lyrix didn't call for a doctor. She took his hand. She began to sing. Music, she had said earlier, changes the chemistry of grief. It changes the chemistry of fear, too. The song wasn't complex. It was a small one, the kind of melody you hum while shelling peas or patching sails. But it had a trick in it. It anchored breath. It suggested a beat and then let a heart find it. Jace's fingers twitched. His pupils, blown wide, began to narrow to a size that could interpret light as message instead of threat. He blinked. World wobbled. He breathed in. He breathed out. He focused on Lyrix's face and found, to his relief, that faces could still be held in the mind like warm stones. "Hi," he said, and his grin was the best kind of broken. "Hi," she answered, and her smile was older than war. The ship counted itself and found most of itself present. The Vast were behind them, their calculus disrupted by unruly human variables. The Ovinex were still in front and still hungry, because hunger ignores news for a while. But the jump had given the Medusan cruiser one more day, and sometimes a day is all that's needed to build the rest of a story. Jace slept like a body that had spent itself and then been handed back pieces one at a time. He dreamed rain. He dreamed a dog that knew doors. He dreamed Lyrix's voice threading the air like strength turned into sound. He woke hungry. "Now that's human," Lyrix said, pleased. She gave him broth, then thicker food, and watched color spread on his cheeks like the first sunset after a long storm. Outside, the cruiser drifted in a field of rocks that glittered faintly. A mining hazard turned sanctuary. News bled in. The human fleet had regrouped behind Mars with an allied escort. The Ovinex had bitten more than they could turn into merchandise. Several of their skiffs had been boarded by a coalition team who had decided that nothing should be harvested without consent, including lives. Jace asked for clothes again. Lyrix had anticipated it. She brought him a ship suit, soft and forgiving. It fit him like a plan. He walked the ward. He picked up a tray. He brought water to a Beryllian who could not move his arms. He told Eerie, using gestures and a few words from her language that Lyrix taught him at speed, the story of the time he lost a boot and found a friendship. The ward listened, because stories are an intravenous line into courage. Later, near the hour when ship lights dimmed to mimic a dusk none of them have seen in a long time, an alert sounded, a small one, an invitation rather than an alarm. A salvage craft had tugged in a pod from the battlefield they'd abandoned. It held survivors. It held a problem. The pod had been damaged, internal pressure compromised, traditional docking impossible without decompressing the cruiser's receiving bay. Everyone in the pod was dying, and everyone on the ship would survive if they did nothing. There are equations war wants people to solve. Practical ones, cruel ones, they are correct. They are also wrong. Lyrix and Jace found themselves in the receiving bay, standing in air that smelled like hot metal and fate. The bay doors loomed, thick and expensive. Engineers stood with tablet screens and haunted eyes. The captain arrived, her calm like a cup set carefully on a table that had been shaking for hours. Jace looked at the schematic. He saw the problem. He also saw the field seal device he'd used earlier, sitting on a crate like a benched player who knew it was time to be brave again. "Give me 4 more of those," he said. "You'll die," an engineer said without rancor. "Not if we're clever," Jace replied. Lyrix picked up one field seal, weighed it in her palm. "He is clever." The captain did not veto. She measured them with a glance, then spoke to the air. "Prep 6 field seals. Pressurize external umbilical bay to minimal. We will do the math of stubbornness." The plan would be taught later at academies under a more dignified name. At the time, it was simply a handful of people doing something that sounded almost feasible. They would lay a staggered web of seal lattices from the ship's inner bay to the pod's hatch, creating a segmented tunnel that could be pressurized one chamber at a time. It was risky. It was slow. It was human. Jace stepped into the bay with a seal under each arm. A pressure suit wrapped him like a promise. Lyrix was beside him in a Medusan version of the same suit, green veins glowing faintly along the wrists where her species' reproduction displayed itself with the same lack of embarrassment as sunlight. She adjusted his valves with precise fingers and then, for luck, tapped his knuckles twice. They took the first step into the umbilical as if stepping onto ice that might not forgive a misstep. The umbilical was a throat. The stars beyond were teeth. The pod rotated out there, a box with lives inside, the condensation frozen along its seams like inattentive frost. They laid the first lattice. It unfurled between umbilical ribs and kissed the edges of the hatch. Air hissed into the chamber and stayed. Jace looked back toward the inner bay. Through 3 panes of engineered transparency, he met the eyes of the captain and the shapes of the ward, and the place where a child slept because adults had decided to stand up. "Next," he said, and they laid the second lattice and the third. Halfway, because all good stories test you hardest halfway. A micrometeor flitted through the edge of the umbilical like an impatient idea and tore a hole the size of a fist in the second lattice. Pressure screamed. The umbilical lurched. Jace was yanked sideways, his tether snapping taut. Lyrix hit the web with both hands and activated extra anchors, the suit's green light at her wrists flashing with her accelerating heart. She grabbed Jace's shoulder and shoved him back into the lane. "Hold," she said again, but this time it was command and prayer braided. He held. He slapped a patch over the hole. The patch failed. He slapped another. He swore like a man who had learned the craft from singularly devoted artisans. Lyrix flashed him a spare patch, and together they patched the patch. The hiss dwindled, sulking, until it was only a sulk an engineer would notice. They breathed. They moved. The pod was close enough now to read the paint. A serial number, an emblem he knew. A set of scratches that told a story of a debris field navigated by a pilot who had loved every stupid minute of it. He could see faces through the viewport. An old man holding a younger man's hand as if the contact could make the air last longer. A woman with a split lip and eyes that understood triage. A child who wasn't eerie but could have been, and that was enough. They set the final lattice, fused it to the pod, and signaled pressurization. The gauges on their wrists trembled, learned trust, and filled with color. Jace and Lyrix turned the hatch together, and for a moment it resisted like a story that wanted a different ending. They tried again. It turned. Air slid between spaces like a secret finally told. The hatch opened. The old man put his hand on Jace's helmet, then on Lyrix's, a benediction given by one survivor to another. They moved the survivors through the segmented tunnel, one chamber at a time, sealing, equalizing, opening, sealing. It was tedious, terrifying, perfect. When they emerged into the receiving bay with the last survivor, a girl with hair tight against her skull and eyes wide but not yet shattered, the bay erupted into that quiet chaos that means work will save you for at least the next 10 minutes. Jace took off his helmet and breathed ship air like a man kissing a familiar mouth after a long absence. Lyrix peeled back her visor and smiled a crushed smile, the kind you give when you have run out of the good ones but still owe the world something. They leaned their foreheads together for a second, because that was how you said thank you with your last usable nerve. After, there were hours that routine filled like sand poured into a jar around the larger stones of crisis. The vast drifted elsewhere to chase a richer opportunity. The Ovinex retreated to count losses. The Medusan cruiser functioned as a hospital and a home, and a rumor about people who refused the terms of markets and physics. The child Eerie woke. She climbed from her bed faster than anyone wanted. She crossed the ward with that stubborn age of children who have learned loss and therefore disregard gravity's recommendations. She held her arms up to Jace as if he had been waiting for that exact request. He lifted her, careful as a god learning how to be kind. Lyrix watched and thought of how many kinds of love were useful on a ship. The precise love of a chart, the messy love that insists on better endings, the small love of holding someone else's cup while they drink so the shaking doesn't spill everything. She thought of human neural noise and how it sounded to her like a song she would hum while repairing sails. Days later, the human fleet made contact. It was not a triumphant orchestra. It was a series of quiet pings, a line of lights appearing in a pattern that meant, "We are here." The Medusan captain nodded to no one in particular and to everyone at once and set a course for rendezvous. On the last night before they shifted toward war again, the ward found a pocket of peace. Someone brewed something almost like coffee. Someone else produced a harmonica. The six-handed surgeon shocked everyone by playing it with ostentatious mediocrity. People laughed. Laughter peeled paint off fear. Jace sat on the edge of his bed, healed enough to be dangerous again. Lyrix sat beside him, the sheet between them a line neither of them noticed or needed. He told her about Earth, about deserts that sang in the wind and cities that learned to dance after bombs forgot their own names, and pie that tasted like an apology you didn't deserve and got anyway. Lyrix told him about her planet, about lights strung along cliffside villages like constellations that had come down to eat dinner with you, about nights where the sea threw back the stars in imitation and gratitude, about harvest festivals where you exchanged proteins at your wrists under lanterns, because biology deserved ceremony as much as soldiers did. It felt like a promise to exchange these stories. It felt like a treaty signed between two people on behalf of civilizations. When the ship pivoted days later into formation, when the fleet stretched itself into a line like a poem about refusal, Jay stood with the Marines. He no longer needed a field seal case. He had a rifle and a coil memory, and a nurse who had taught him that staying without fear is physics and staying with fear is bravery. Lyrix stood in the triage bay, her hands as instruments, her voice the metronome of a heart that had decided to keep time for others. The battle that followed would be told by poets and accountants, edited by politicians, improved by children. It was a terrible and ordinary thing. Ships died. People lived. The line wavered. The line held. Jace found himself in a boarding skirmish where he used his rifle less than his voice and his body more than both, pinning a predator to a wall with the weight of 1,000 choices and yelling for a medic who turned out to be Lyrix, because medicine sometimes walked into gunfire if the heart involved beat at a cadence it recognized. He took a wound in the shoulder, long and educational. Lyrix stapled it shut with medfoam and a look that said murder is an option if you do not lie down immediately. He lay down immediately. She touched his forehead again, a ritual now, a map coordinate. He cried then because time had finally allowed him to do so, and she wiped his face with that small cloth that becomes a flag when you carry it into a storm long enough. When they won, it wasn't victory so much as a cessation of losing. The fleet did not cheer in one voice. It sighed in many. The Ovinex left the mining arrays like unpopular guests leaving a party. The vast calcified away to the next spreadsheet's victims. Earth turned under sunlight and clouds as unaware as a sleeping child of the monsters who had tiptoed past her bed and gone away for now. Jay stood on an observation deck. Lyrix stood beside him. The window showed a scatter of ships and the polite shimmer of a distant aurora where a magnetosphere made art out of violence. "Your inflammation," Lyrix said suddenly, and Jace nearly choked on air, because the human mind is built to find humor in the innocent cruelty of technical words. She didn't blush. Erilyn rarely did. It was a misunderstanding I am obligated to document. She continued with calm professionalism that made it somehow more tender. "I noted it as neuroendocrine. Is that correct?" He coughed. "Yeah, it's normal." He hesitated then because honesty seemed to be the currency of the day. "We're built to find life compelling even while dying." Lyrix considered that. "Good system." "Bad timing," he said. She nodded. "You will teach me your timing, I will teach you mine." He looked at her. "We'll need a lot of days." "We will make them," she said, as if discussing a menu. They stood in silence that wasn't empty. The window showed the future failing to make up its mind and therefore promising everything. Jace flexed his wounded shoulder and winced. Lyrix noticed and adjusted the angle of his sling by a fraction of an inch. The pain retreated, surprised that someone had worked so hard to remove its last excuse. He breathed easier. He noticed, not for the first time, that he was alive. In the following weeks, the fleet would disperse to repair and ready, to carry survivors to planets where the air tasted of salt and hope, to rebuild mines with better laws and guards and stories. The Medusan cruiser would remain a hospital and a rumor, and its crew would be a prayer said at the edge of battles. Let the medship arrive. Let Lyrix be there with her hands and her voice. Let Jace be somewhere laughing at a problem until it was ashamed to be a problem. But for now, on that deck, he turned to her and offered his palm, human ritual, ancient and effective. She placed her hand against his, their lines invisible but intersecting. He pressed their palms together gently, a bargain neither could sign except by staying alive long enough to keep it. He spoke. Not a joke this time, not a plan. A small truth, the kind you can carry in a pocket against the day you need it. "We're not the best at a lot of things," he said, "but we stay." Lyrix looked outward at the fleet, inward at what courage felt like at rest. "Yes," she said, "you stay and you sing while you do." He thought of the coil. He thought of rain and a bridge. He thought of a dog who knew doors. He thought of a child sleeping because adults had sung. He thought of the market and its wrong math, and of the right math that looks like hands catching other hands halfway along a shattered corridor. He thought of the misinterpreted alarm of a body that had decided to stay alive with inappropriate enthusiasm in a medical ward during a war, and he laughed with a softness that said the world could be forgiven, at least for now. The observation deck lights dimmed. Stars thickened their speech in the window. Somewhere on the ship, someone tuned a harmonica and tried again. The note was bad. The next note was better. The third note made someone in the ward hum along. Jay squeezed Lyrix's hand. She squeezed back. They didn't promise anything except what could be promised honestly: mourning if they were lucky, work if they were allowed, laughter even when it cost, songs especially when it did. The fleet oriented itself toward wherever the next refusal would be needed. The engines came online like a choir clearing throats. The captain stood on the bridge with debt in her pockets and gratitude in her voice and said, "Go." And they went, ready to make new days out of impossible math, ready to lay lattices between rooms that shouldn't have been connected, and then walk through those rooms with people who would otherwise have died, ready to stand on walls and become part of them. It wasn't glory. It was the work. It was the only thing worth the blood and the music and the strange humor of human bodies insisting on joy at inconvenient times. And that day the galaxy learned humanity doesn't conquer, it endures. Headphone, if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more epic HFY sci-fi tales. Until next time, stay human, stay unbroken.